A breaking news alert set off a national firestorm after new footage surfaced from an ICE agent involved in a fatal shooting during an immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis earlier this week. The video, released after days of speculation, shows a tense and rapidly escalating encounter involving a vehicle. In the footage, the agent appears to be placed in immediate danger, contradicting early claims that the shooting was unprovoked. The incident resulted in the death of a 37-year-old woman and instantly drew intense public scrutiny, protests, and political reaction. Vice President J.D. Vance responded to the footage on social media, arguing that the public had been misled. He stated that the officer's life was clearly at risk and that the decision to fire was made in self-defense, not as an act of aggression. Federal authorities later echoed that assessment, confirming that the agent's actions were consistent with self-defense protocols under threat. The shooting reignited a broader debate over sanctuary city policies. Officials pointed to Minneapolis's long-standing practice of limiting cooperation with federal immigration enforcement, arguing that it has resulted in dangerous individuals being released back into the community. They cited past cases involving violent crimes against children, claiming such policies force federal agents to conduct risky operations to locate individuals who might otherwise have been detained. What few expected was that the shooting would become the catalyst for something far larger. Just after 3 a.m., in South Minneapolis, while the city slept, unmarked federal vehicles quietly surrounded a 14-story hotel near a major interstate. Within moments, exits were sealed, elevators were disabled mid-floor, and armed teams secured stairwells. Agents moved swiftly and methodically, breaching doors without warning and ordering occupants to the ground as rooms were cleared one by one. The operation advanced floor by floor with military precision. In under an hour, joint teams from ICE, DHS, and the DEA detained more than 230 undocumented individuals, the majority of whom were Somali nationals. Investigators discovered forged passports, stacks of prepaid burner phones, and large sums of cash hidden in walls, ceilings, and luggage. Then the scope of the operation shifted dramatically. Search teams uncovered dozens of firearms, including loaded handguns and assault-style rifles. In locked suitcases and maintenance areas, agents found large quantities of cocaine and fentanyl packaged for distribution. Cash seizures quickly exceeded $4 million. What began as an immigration enforcement action had uncovered what authorities now believe to be a heavily armed drug trafficking hub operating in plain sight. By dawn, the raid was already unraveling a much larger network. Phones seized during the operation continued buzzing with encrypted messages, delivery instructions, and missed calls. Analysts worked through the night mapping connections, linking numbers, locations, and false identities into a single organized structure spanning multiple states. At the center of the investigation were two individuals who stunned investigators. One was a 45-year-old Somali-born judge with a spotless public reputation. The other was a 42-year-old licensed attorney practicing both immigration and criminal law in Minneapolis. Publicly, they were respected figures in the community. Privately, federal investigators now believe they were orchestrating the network from behind the scenes. What started with a single gunshot had triggered a sweeping federal investigation, one that officials say may expose corruption reaching far beyond a single hotel and deep into the institutions meant to uphold the law. And according to investigators, this was only the beginning. Evidence recovered from the hotel and a series of off-site storage units revealed what investigators now believe was a carefully constructed operation that had taken nearly 10 years to build. According to federal officials, the couple at the center of the case had created a hidden pipeline that funneled Somali migrants into the United States. Once inside the country, these individuals were supplied with false identities and systematically absorbed into the organization. Some became drivers, others guarded stash houses or transported cash and narcotics. Each role was assigned with precision, and loyalty was not optional. Investigators say compliance was enforced through a web of control, crushing debt, explicit threats, and pressure placed on family members still living overseas. Leaving the network was not considered an option. What made the operation nearly untouchable for years was the protection its leaders allegedly enjoyed. Their professional status granted them access and influence most criminal organizations never achieve. Court connections delayed search warrants. Legal filings slowed active investigations. Quiet bribes changed hands. Federal agents now believe corruption reached into multiple layers of enforcement, including border personnel, local police units, and even senior law enforcement officials tasked with stopping exactly this kind of activity. As protection held firm, narcotics flowed freely. Drugs sourced from Mexico and Colombia moved north, passed through Minneapolis, and were distributed across state lines throughout the Midwest. What had once appeared to be disconnected incidents of violence were later reclassified. The FBI ultimately linked the organization to at least 24 gang-related murders in Minneapolis alone, crimes that, until the network was exposed, had been treated as unrelated street violence. The corruption did not stop with law enforcement. Court documents later revealed direct connections between the organization and Minneapolis's Somali-born mayor at the time. Prosecutors alleged he provided political cover, delayed enforcement responses, and personally benefited from the operation. His eventual guilty plea confirmed what investigators had long suspected. The network's protection extended to the highest levels of city government. As the investigation tightened, surveillance teams noticed a sudden shift. At 8:21 a.m., cameras at Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport captured the two central figures arriving separately. They carried almost no luggage. Both held newly issued passports and one-way international tickets. No press statements, no legal representatives. To federal agents monitoring the situation, the message was unmistakable: they were attempting to flee. ICE and FBI units immediately initiated containment procedures, quietly closing off sections of the terminal. Facial recognition software tracked their movements through security checkpoints and concourses in real time. At Otta, Chugosu, moments before boarding began, agents moved in. The arrests took just 22 seconds. There was no resistance, no public speeches, no confrontation, just handcuffs, locking shut in the middle of a crowded departure hall as travelers looked on, unaware they were witnessing the collapse of a decade-long criminal shield. With their detention, the organization lost its protection overnight. Within hours, prosecutors approved a wave of expanded search and seizure warrants. Financial records long buried behind shell companies and foreign accounts were unlocked. Names that had remained hidden for years surfaced all at once. What began as an immigration enforcement action had now fully evolved into a national narcotics conspiracy case. And Minneapolis, investigators said, was only the entry point. At exactly 4 a.m., across 6 states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, and Michigan, federal warrants went live simultaneously. More than 1,200 federal agents moved into position at the same moment, launching coordinated raids designed to dismantle what remained of the network in a single strike. According to officials, the operation marked one of the largest multi-state enforcement actions in recent years. And for investigators, it confirmed one final conclusion. This network did not survive for a decade by accident. It survived because someone inside the system helped keep it alive. Inside multiple FBI command centers, live feeds flooded wall-sized screens as federal agencies synchronized their movements down to the second. ICE, the DEA, and DHS advanced as a unified force, sharing intelligence in real time. Major roadways were shut down without public notice. Electrical infrastructure and communications hubs were quietly monitored to prevent interference. What followed was not a routine enforcement action, it was a coordinated takedown executed with military-level discipline. The first breach occurred in northern Minnesota. Before dawn, a reinforced steel door was forced inward by explosive entry. Armed lookouts inside attempted to scatter, but flashbangs detonated almost instantly, disorienting the room and collapsing resistance within seconds. Gunfire erupted in the confined corridors that followed short, violent bursts, echoing through narrow hallways. 2 suspects were shot after refusing commands and engaging officers. During the exchange, a federal agent was hit in the shoulder. He was dragged to cover by teammates and evacuated as the operation pressed forward without pause. Minutes later, outside Milwaukee, another team hit a converted auto shop, concealed behind false walls and rolling steel bays. As agents entered, a suspect opened fire from an elevated platform overlooking the main floor. Federal teams returned fire, quickly neutralizing the threat. Inside, the scale of the operation became clear. Pallets of narcotics were stacked shoulder-high. Bricks of cocaine, stamped and shrink-sealed, lined the walls. Kilograms of fentanyl, vacuum-packed and labeled for distribution, were staged for immediate shipment. At 4:37 a.m., teams struck an apartment complex on Chicago's South Side. Simultaneous entries hit 3 floors at once. Suspects attempted to flee through stairwells and across rooftops. One fired blindly through drywall in an attempt to slow advancing agents. Another tried to discard a firearm over a balcony before being subdued. Federal teams locked down the structure, cleared each unit methodically, and began systematic searches. Rifles, handguns, and stacks of cash were pulled from hidden compartments inside walls, ventilation shafts, and beneath false flooring. By sunrise, the magnitude of the operation was undeniable. Across 73 separate raid locations, federal agents encountered fortified positions, early warning alarm systems, and weapons staged for immediate use. Within the first 36 hours alone, 4 distinct firefights broke out as suspects chose armed resistance over surrender. 9 cartel enforcers were killed during these confrontations. 2 federal agents were wounded but survived their injuries. Arrests mounted rapidly. By the end of the first day, 412 individuals were in custody, including more than 260 confirmed cartel operatives. Dozens of others were detained on weapons violations, large-scale trafficking charges, and federal conspiracy counts. By the close of day 2, total arrests exceeded 640 people, many directly tied to interstate drug transportation routes, armed enforcement units, and money laundering cells operating across multiple states. The seizures matched the violence. Convoys of armored vehicles rolled out from raid sites carrying massive quantities of cocaine, fentanyl, and methamphetamine. Safes were forced open to reveal tens of millions of dollars in cash. Hidden armories surfaced stockpiles of rifles, ammunition, and tactical gear prepared for sustained conflict. For federal authorities, the message was clear. This was not just a criminal network, it was a fully operational, heavily armed enterprise prepared for war. And according to investigators, the operation had only begun to expose the full scope of what had been built in the shadows. Investigators discovered scenes that underscored just how prepared this organization was for sustained violence. Hundreds of rifle magazines were found taped together for rapid reloads. Ammunition was stacked in wooden crates like warehouse inventory. On-site digital forensics teams immediately began cloning servers, freezing transaction ledgers mid-update before data could be wiped or altered. What made the operation especially dangerous was location. Several targets were located just minutes from schools, playgrounds, and densely populated residential blocks. In some homes, narcotics were stored within arm's reach of children's beds. Firearms were hidden behind false wall panels inside family residences. Every forced entry carried the risk of ambush or worse, innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. By the second day, federal command reached a unanimous conclusion. This was not a local trafficking ring. It was a hardened, interstate cartel operation trained for violence, structured for longevity, and deeply embedded in the American heartland. This was not a sweep, it was a conflict. As the 6-state operation concluded and the immediate danger subsided, investigators began the slower, more sobering task of reconstructing what the network had done long before anyone realized it existed. The timeline was far longer and far darker than originally believed. Financial records, encrypted accounting systems, and cooperating witness testimony revealed that the organization had been active for nearly a decade. What began as small-scale smuggling gradually evolved into an industrial pipeline. Drugs moved north from Mexico and Colombia, crossed the border concealed inside legitimate commercial shipments, then radiated outward from Minneapolis like arteries supplying a body. The volume shocked even veteran agents. Analysts conservatively estimated that hundreds of tons of narcotics had entered the United States through this single network. Cocaine moved fast for profit. Methamphetamine was used to dominate territory and control users. Fentanyl was deployed with devastating efficiency. Each shipment was broken down, redistributed, and pushed into cities, suburbs, and rural towns across the Midwest. The human cost was undeniable. Emergency room data showed overdose deaths in key Minnesota counties had quadrupled over the past 10 years. In certain neighborhoods, fentanyl-related fatalities surged by more than 300% in just 3 years. Violent crime followed the drugs. Homicide rates climbed. Armed robberies became routine. Turf disputes escalated into drive-by shootings and executions carried out in parking lots, alleyways, and apartment stairwells. Every spike aligned precisely with the network's expansion. Witnesses described how migrants smuggled into the country were immediately assigned roles. Some transported shipments. Others guarded stash houses or collected cash. Many were trapped by fabricated debts, threatened with exposure to authorities, or warned that family members overseas would suffer consequences if they refused. Leaving the organization was never an option. Compliance was enforced through fear. The damage did not remain confined to criminal circles. Fentanyl leaked into counterfeit pills sold to teenagers. Cocaine fueled gang violence and sophisticated money laundering schemes. Methamphetamine hollowed out entire blocks, keeping users awake for days while addiction tore families apart. Social workers described neighborhoods where substance abuse spread faster than any public health response could contain it. Behind it all was discipline. Trafficking routes rotated every few weeks. Vehicles were abandoned and replaced without hesitation. Communication platforms shifted constantly. When pressure increased in one region, shipments rerouted overnight. The network adapted faster than local agencies could follow until the hotel raid shattered the system's internal balance. As federal analysts mapped the damage, a chilling pattern became impossible to ignore. The violence was not random. The overdoses were not accidental. They were predictable outcomes of a system designed to maximize profit with complete disregard for human life. In internal briefings, one estimate circulated quietly. Tens of thousands of lives impacted directly or indirectly by the drugs moved through this single organization. For years, it had operated in plain sight, shielded by professional titles, community influence, and institutional blind spots. Judges signed orders. Lawyers filed motions. Patrols passed by without intervention. Meanwhile, entire neighborhoods paid the price. By the time the full scale was understood, there was no longer any debate. This was not merely a criminal enterprise. It was a sustained assault on public safety, and the reckoning had only just begun. And as investigators turned inward, one truth became unavoidable. This network did not survive for nearly a decade through secrecy alone. It survived because silence, especially when paired with authority, can be just as deadly as corruption itself. The network had endured because the very institutions designed to stop it had been quietly compromised. As interrogations progressed, accounts from mid-level operatives began to converge. The same names surfaced again and again. Payment amounts aligned with banking records. Phone metadata placed sworn officers alongside vehicles that never should have cleared inspection checkpoints. This was no longer speculation or rumor. The corruption was traceable, documented with dates, signatures, and digital trails that left little room for denial. Within 72 hours, internal affairs units began operating in lockstep with federal prosecutors. Subpoenas went out without press releases. Evidence lockers were opened. Home safes were searched. Each hour added new names to an expanding list. By the end of the week, 12 local police officers were under arrest. Some had accepted cash in exchange for overlooking traffic stops. Others admitted to providing advance warnings before raids. One officer confessed to escorting vehicles he knew were transporting narcotics, clearing intersections under the cover of routine patrol duties. Then came the name no one expected to see: a sitting police chief. Investigators alleged that he had received regular payments to redirect manpower away from critical corridors and to suppress internal complaints before they gained traction. Emails recovered from long archived servers painted a troubling picture. Investigations deliberately slowed, complaints mislabeled as clerical mistakes, evidence quietly buried before it could surface. The betrayal cut deep. Public trust unraveled almost overnight. Officers who had spent years patrolling the same streets suddenly found themselves questioned by the communities they served. Protests returned, but this time they were not directed solely at enforcement tactics. They were fueled by the realization that criminal organizations had not just evaded the system, they had infiltrated it. And it didn't stop with law enforcement. Financial audits exposed municipal officials who approved questionable contracts tied to shell corporations. Immigration consultants funneled clients directly into the criminal pipeline. Court clerks altered filing dates. Each individual act may have seemed minor on its own, but together they formed a shield layer by layer, protecting the cartel from exposure. In closed-door briefings, prosecutors returned to a single word: ecosystem. This was not one corrupt official or a handful of bribes. It was an environment where misconduct could exist unnoticed, normalized through routine, and justified as pragmatism. The network paid for silence. Over time, silence became habit. The consequences were swift. Entire departments were placed under federal oversight. Previously closed cases were reopened. Convictions linked to compromised officers were flagged for review. Careers that had taken decades to build collapsed in a matter of days, ending not in retirement ceremonies, but in handcuffs. For agents who had faced gunfire only days earlier, this phase of the operation carried a different weight. Confronting armed traffickers was one thing. Coming to terms with how deeply institutional trust had been eroded was something else entirely. But the exposure served a purpose. By dismantling the internal shield, investigators ensured the network could not reform. Routes remained shut down. Replacement couriers failed to move product. Without protection, shipments stalled and alliances fractured. The illusion of immunity disappeared. What remained was accountability, slow, methodical, and unforgiving. And for the first time in years, the system began to correct itself from the inside out. In the weeks that followed, Minneapolis started to feel different. The noise faded first. Sirens grew less frequent. Helicopters no longer circled through the night. What replaced them was something unfamiliar, quiet, not from fear, but from absence. The absence of a machine that had operated unchecked for nearly a decade. Blocks that had once been dominated by open-air dealing began to fall quiet. Not because fear disappeared, but because the supply had been cut off upstream. Federal analysts soon confirmed what residents were already noticing in their daily lives: the pipeline had been broken. Within a month, emergency overdose admissions at several Minnesota hospitals dropped by nearly 40%. Street-level drug seizures declined as well, not due to reduced enforcement, but because distribution networks had collapsed. Dealers who once operated openly either vanished or turned on one another. Without protection and without product, survival became unstable. The legal consequences moved just as quickly. Federal prosecutors filed hundreds of indictments directly tied to the organization. Charges spanned narcotics, trafficking, weapons, offenses, racketeering, human smuggling, money laundering, and public corruption. Several cases were elevated to high-priority national security prosecutions and fast-tracked through federal courts. For the two figures once believed untouchable, the collapse was total. Assets were frozen within hours, properties were seized, financial accounts were drained and cataloged. Courtrooms where one had once presided as an authority figure became places where his name appeared only in connection with conspiracy and abuse of power. Legal credentials were suspended, professional standing erased almost overnight. But the reckoning did not stop with two defendants. Families stepped forward. Parents who had buried children lost to overdoses. Residents who had fled neighborhoods consumed by violence. Migrants who described being drawn into a system they did not understand until escape was no longer possible. Their testimonies filled affidavits, transcripts, and sealed hearings, forming a record of long-term harm that could not be dismissed or minimized. Federal officials spoke with rare candor. They did not call the operation a victory. They called it a warning, a demonstration of how quickly organized crime can entrench itself inside legitimate institutions when oversight weakens and complacency takes hold. The cartel had not relied on violence alone. It relied on trust, appearances, and silence. That silence was broken. New oversight measures followed. Joint task forces were expanded. Data-sharing protocols were rewritten. For the first time in years, federal and local agencies operated without internal resistance. The gaps that had once allowed the network to flourish were sealed deliberately, one by one. No one claimed the city was healed. Too many lives had already been lost. Too many neighborhoods had been hollowed out by addiction and fear. The damage would not fade quickly, and some wounds would never fully close. But something fundamental had changed. The myth of untouchability was gone. The belief that power, status, or professional titles could shield criminal enterprises from accountability collapsed under the weight of evidence. What began with a single gunshot had unraveled a decade-long conspiracy and forced a reckoning that could no longer be postponed. For Minneapolis and for every state caught in the network's shadow, the message was unmistakable. The threat had been real, the cost had been immense, and when the line was finally crossed, the response was decisive. When the final warrants were served and the last evidence vehicles departed the city, something unfamiliar settled over Minneapolis. Not relief, not celebration, silence. The kind that demands reflection. For years, danger had moved quietly through courtrooms, neighborhoods, and highways hidden behind paperwork, authority, and routine decisions no one thought to question. What the investigation ultimately exposed was not just a criminal organization, but how close an entire system came to failure without recognizing it. Institutions do not collapse all at once. They erode gradually, one ignored warning, one delayed file, one compromised decision at a time. This network did not survive through violence or secrecy alone. It survived through comfort, through the assumption that authority did not require scrutiny. That assumption became its greatest weapon. The lesson is an uncomfortable one, but unavoidable. Corruption rarely announces itself. It wears familiarity. It hides behind professional language, trusted reputations, and closed-door meetings justified as procedure. When oversight weakens, power stops serving the public and begins protecting itself. And history shows that the cost of noticing too late is always measured in lives. By the time harm becomes visible, communities have often been paying the price for years, through addiction, through violence, through lives lost quietly, without headlines or public attention. This case dismantled a dangerous illusion that crime lives only on the fringes of society. Here, it lived in offices, behind official seals, inside paperwork stamped and approved as routine. The most damaging actors were not always the ones holding weapons. They were the ones opening doors, slowing accountability, and shutting down questions before they could be asked. Law enforcement is trained to confront external threats. What nearly broke this system was betrayal from within. And yet, what followed revealed something equally important. Once the internal protection was stripped away, The network collapsed with startling speed. Routes failed. Payments stopped. Cover disappeared. Without immunity, the structure could not sustain itself. Accountability applied evenly and without exception worked exactly as it was meant to. Oversight restored momentum. Transparency became a deterrent. The system did not repair itself overnight, but it began to function again, not as a shield for power, but as a safeguard for the public. That warning does not belong to investigators alone. It belongs to all of us. Justice cannot be delegated to titles, uniforms, or reputations. It depends on vigilance, on refusing to accept silence as normal, and on having the courage to question authority when facts no longer align with explanations. When citizens disengage, corruption gains space to grow. When scrutiny fades, abuse of power becomes comfortable. This story does not end with arrests. It ends with responsibility. Because the next network will not look exactly like this one. It never does. But the conditions that allow it to take root, complacency, unchecked authority, and silence, are always the same. If you believe no badge, robe, or position should ever place someone above the law, comment, never again. If you believe accountability is the line that keeps society intact, hit like. And if you believe silence protects the wrong people, share this story so the warning outlives the case itself.